Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. My name is Reed. Along with me is Mike. Mike, we are in the midst of football season. Good start for your
Hmm,
Raiders. Bad
that is
start
a
for
great
my
start.
Bears. Bad start for my Bears. Although Purdue, who I love more than the Bears, Purdue is 2-0. I will take it. Although I did play USC on Saturday, so depending on when this posts, I may be very happy or very upset at that time. Um, but
Right?
fun one for us today. One of these more sort of long form talks we wanted to have. You and I are just kind of talking about some things, and we were talking about legacies a lot. We talked about the legacy of Alan Moore last week. We just thought we'd talk a little bit. What will the legacy of this era of comics be? And I think for you and me, we're going to kind of lump the last 20 years together as kind of modern comics. So really talking, maybe 2005 to 2025, somewhere in that range. So Mike, if I know you've been buying comics since 60s, correct? Late 60s? You've been
70.
buying books? Early 70s. Okay, you've been buying books. I've been buying them since the early 90s. I was born in the late 80s. So you and I have seen, I've been 30 something years, you're 50 something years at this point of comics. When you think of the last 20 years, what do you think 30 years from now, 20 years from now, what do you think the legacy of this era of comics will be?
We're gonna have to put it in a metal category of some sort. I don't know if it's gonna be but bronze, iron,
The
the
golden age,
iron
the silver age.
age,
Maybe this is the dollar
this,
bin age.
the dollar bin age, the rusty age. I don't know. It's so weird, right? Because we're in the midst of whatever this age is, and we don't even know if it's going to have a name or not. Lots of ups and downs, lots and lots of ups and downs, mostly downs for the comic books. But what's weird is that this will always be described as the movie era in the comic book medium because the comic book medium got elevated to this blockbuster movie era that was really shook the pop culture world. One thing for sure that happened is that it was cool to be a comic book nerd where it was really shunned upon, in decades past. So I think what they'll end up describing it as, it'll be it'll have to be in conjunction with the movies that exploded on the scene. The comic books were never the same. Movies were never quite the same. Television advertisements were not even, everything went superhero because of the movies. And of course, the only reason there were the movies were the comics. But especially with the big two, they just really struggled to capture the moment. And we have dozens of videos on that probably on our channel alone. But it
Mhm,
was just so unsatisfying. The comic book reader was kind of let down in general,
mhm.
uh, instead of inspired. In other words, the two could have gone hand in hand and he hit no new heights together, where instead the one, the progenitor of the whole movement was in a slump. It's so weird. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think it's the era. I would say it's the era of missed opportunities more than anything. Like you said, I was in high school in 2005. I was almost graduated. It was not cool to be a comic book fan back then. Like I don't look at it all anymore, but I used to be an athlete. I played on multiple sports teams, and I remember having girlfriends that they were not finding out I read comic books, even though I was going to the store and
It was
picking up
at the
Spider-Man
bottom
and
of the gym
Batman.
bag
It was,
under the old socks.
that was not a publicly discussed thing. Like that was what mom and dad knew at home, not girlfriend and friends at school. And so that shift, like you said, of all of a sudden Iron Man is this pop culture icon and people are quoting superhero movies and talking about the Guardians of the Galaxy and wearing infinity gauntlets and all that. We never ever would have thought we would have gotten to that. And like you said, for the comics, that's the big thing that will always stand out to me is for some reason the movies created conflict with the comics instead of working with each other. And it was really weird to see. the missed opportunity that was that. I mean, you and I have discussed so many times about they could have sold comics at the movie theaters. You could have done an ongoing series set in the MCU. You could have tied into the DCEU. You could have done, hey, the Dark Knight trilogy of movies is over, but here's a comic book in that universe that takes place after. What you could have done so many things, and
It
they just
it
never.
was to use a sports analogy, it was the guy where everybody's on the other side of the basketball court and he's all alone and he's got the layup and he misses it.
He just goes for the slam dunk and misses. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it will always be the era of missed opportunity for me. I think we had so much multimedia stuff from TV shows like Smallville and the MCU, the DCU, the Arkham series of games, and they tried comic books, but they never invested the way they should have, and
The
they never integrated
CW,
it enough.
the CW heavily invested and
Yeah,
they had a few hit shows based on
and they
superheroes.
always would do these weird digital first one shot comics, and then it was just they never. It was such a missed opportunity. I think the other portion where I'd say even if I remove the movies, the New 52, and I think some of the initiatives Marvel had, like the Ultimate Universe and
The
some other
Ultimate,
lines,
yep.
missed opportunities. The New 52 is probably the most, in retrospect, I can't believe it failed thing in all the comic books. And that I have lately been on a kick of reading New 52 omnibuses. There were some really quality books that came out. And the fact that they bungled that, the fact that they made this, and I think that's another error that this would be defined by, is it was that it's non-committal. It is this idea like when you got to the New 52, it was like they were right there on the precipice of going, point of no return, gentlemen. We are starting over. And if they had just taken that step, well, yes, I think fans would have always been like, man, I want Superman back with Lois, and we miss this character. If you'd have stuck with it, I think for another 4 or 5 years, it would have stuck, and we'd be in this era now where Superman and Wonder Woman would be seen as a couple. They'd be like, oh, yeah, that's in the comics for a decade. And you could have taken some of these larger swings, but the New 52 was dragged down by like, we cannot let go of what we spent all this time telling you we were going to let go of.
And the
And I feel like,
social media was brutal on
yeah, and I think
that era.
I think the thing is these comic book publishers in this era where I think it's a missed opportunity. There were so many chances to succeed. And this is a phrase I always use with the Bears, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And that's what the Bears always do. And that is what it felt like comics did. You have this massive explosion of cultural relevance of comic book characters. You have these initiatives. And when you go back and look at the creatives involved with stuff like the New 52, you're talking Johns and Fabok and all these guys now that we herald as like, oh, these great indie creators that we all love, A-list artists. They were all involved in this. And we as fans, I think, somewhat hold a thing in terms of we were very critical of things. We sort of pitched the nostalgia of like, no, you got to bring this back. And then they brought it back, and we got mad at them for bringing it back. And I think that's the thing is it's just such a missed opportunity because they never had the fortitude to go, you know what? No, this is what we're doing, and that's a missed opportunity. Go ahead, Mike.
But on the other hand, what did happen in the last 20 years, which was really amazing, these other smaller companies that didn't own the properties that were on the movie screen gave us alternatives when we picked up Superman or Batman or Spider-Man and got disgusted.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like, I can't read this. I don't like this. Went to the indie rack and, but I got to go home with something because I'm a comic book nerd and discovered a lot of incredible stuff. So I think the indies will have this would kind of like be the silver age of the indies.
Yeah, no, the pivot to indie books, and I think that's the other piece of this that's you can't separate it. Um, the fact that I sit here as a fan of DC and Marvel, and I love both, that my favorite comic book is from Titan Comics. If you'd have told me that 10 years ago, I'm not going to buy a Titan comic. What are you talking about? Like, no,
Yeah.
but my favorite two comic books with Savage Sword and Conan are both Titan. I would say Geiger, Redcoat, and if Rook Exodus comes back anytime soon, here would probably be in the running for 3, 4, and 5. Flash Gordon you could probably list my top 10 books, and man, 6 or 7 are indie books, and that would have been unthinkable to me a decade ago. And I think it just shows, like you said, these companies. I think what happened too is Disney and Warner Brothers got more involved with Marvel and DC,
Hey,
and
there's some money to be made here.
the
What?
corporatization.
Yeah.
What's funny is in the
Yeah.
effort to make money, they lost money because they started treating Spider-Man as a brand instead of a character in a story. And what was so interesting is treating Spider-Man as a character in a story is what turned him into a brand. And
Yeah.
when they decided, let's put the brand first and leave the story, you actually hurt the thing that you were trying to grow.
That's
And
a
I think
very good point.
that's where we ended up with so many of these things where it felt directionless and, oh, we need another Robin because, well, there should always be a Robin even though there's 6 of them. And hey, we're struggling sales wise. What if we throw another Batgirl in? And what if we throw another Man in? And oh, what if we had 50 million spider people? And you could just tell there was
Don't
a
forget the
corporatized
42
push.
other flashes. The
42
40,
other flashes, right?
yeah.
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 And it just got to a point where it was, and we started seeing, like we said, the movies were a missed opportunity, but then they also would do weird things like, well, hey, in the TV show, we're having the character look like this or act like this. So we need that to be in the comic books. And it felt so weird because it was like on one spectrum you have this incredibly popular version of Iron Man on screen, and we refuse to make Iron Man more like that in the comics, but this really unpopular version of like Wally West or whoever on TV, oh, we got to put him in the comics. And it was like, what are we doing here? Like, either you're going to embrace what's on the screen or you're not. And we got this weird hodgepodge of both. And so, yeah, I think it's the rise of the indie comic. I think the other thing, while manga has been popular elsewhere, the last 20 years has been defined by manga's takeover of the American comic book fan and the American comic book market, specifically for kids. And I think that's the other part that we look at missed opportunities is typically in business is what you see that are successful. And again, we always bring sports to this. When you see a sports league find an idea that works, typically the other leagues will follow, right? The NFL for a long time created Sunday Ticket where you could get direct TV and you could get all the games. And they were the only one doing that for the first part. And then suddenly baseball was like, oh, that's a really good idea. We're going to offer something like that. And the NBA started offering something like that. And the NHL started offering something like that. Because when someone does something that makes a ton of money and that fans really love, you typically follow it. Where I will always be astonished by the comic book market in the last 20 years, you had manga come in, easy to read, consistency, price point, format, all of that. And comic books largely just went like, we don't need to adopt any of that. That will always be crazy to me because it let manga get such a foothold to where I would say now, even my own teenage son, if I asked him who his 10 favorite characters are, 7 of them are going to be manga characters that I couldn't identify. And really only the 2 or 3 from his childhood, like Iron Man and Superman, would be there still. That always astonishes me. Mike, the takeover of manga, do you think that's also something that'll define this era?
Yeah, it's kind of sad. It's kind of sad to see it go that way. And of course, Darwin Cook was a champion for that. You've got to create the material for the younger audience so that you have an audience in the next generation. And you had the layup there because the movies were so popular. And so it's really disappointing. But like I said, for the indies, this may not be the golden age of indies because indies, kind of started off in the 80s and, trickled in the 90s and did stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
the boom in the last 20 years of the indies is incredible. This is definitely the silver age. It will be lauded as such, in decades to come when the indies really exploded. And they didn't have these properties that were on movies and television at first, but some of their properties did get brought to television and movies. And so, Yeah, I mean, this is the silver age of the indies. It's the whatever age you want to call it, the missed movie age of the big two.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been
Well,
the silver age
not to
of
say that the
indies.
big two didn't do anything right in this era, and I think this is another point we can get to. As much as people love to trash modern comics, I will say Jeff Johns' Green Lantern run stands up to me amongst any run of comic books ever. Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four stands up to me. It's other than Kirby and Lee, which for
Yeah.
obvious purposes, I think it's the second greatest run of Fantastic Four we've ever had. Scott Snyder's Batman, I think, especially if you go back and read it from the New 52, it's maybe not Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil, but man, that's a hell of a run of Batman comic books that really was entertaining. And so I think there are some absolutely fantastic runs of comics. But like you said, the indies were ready to take over when Marvel and DC lost a foothold. And somehow when it should have been impossible to lose a foothold, given the cultural relevance of the characters they did. And I think that kind of brings us to the last sort of piece we can talk about, the digital age for comic books. And I think if we want to talk about where comics got challenged in a way they weren't ready for, was on the digital front in terms of not only some comic book fans going to buying stuff digital, the way people get their content. I mean, I'm not that old, but I remember newspapers being a thing. I don't remember the last time I saw one. And so this ability of comic books that were ubiquitous everywhere in the 90s. They were at the gas station, the grocery store. Now it's in a specialty shop or, hey, buy it digitally. I think the other part to this is the increased contact points between creatives and fans, I think ended up being the defining thing of this age of comic books. And I think it was for the negative piece of it. In that what used to be, I think, maybe this is just for me, I liked when I didn't know anything about the guy writing the comic book that I knew. There was a name on the page, and man, that's a heck of a writer. And that's kind of all you knew. And I try to keep to that as much as possible. I don't look up writers online. I don't go to their, but I think the engagement with fans and writers, which used to be very convinced to like letters in Wizard magazine or letters pages in the back or convention appearances that were for hardcore fans, I think that increased contact points in this increasingly polarized age put comics on a path where writers, I thought, started building a lot of animosity towards fans. Fans started building animosity towards writers. And I think that bled through in a major way into the comic books, where I'm not going to say it's the only reason they did, but I think there's a lot of writers who were like, you know what, man, some of you fans ticked me off. So, you know what? Here's a plot point I know you'll hate. And I'm doing it in the pages of a book you love as a giant middle finger to people like you. And I do think that bled into it. Mike, what do you think about that kind of contact? How do you think the digital increased profile of everything changed comics?
I think the bad outweighed the good. Um,
Mhm.
it sounds, idyllic for a fan to be able to reach out and have an interaction with the creator. That's what they were all striving for in the letters pages in the Silver Age in the back of every comic.
Mhm.
Uh, but one thing that the old comics had going for them, there was always an editor there that read through those and kind of, and it's not like they cherry picked only the good stuff. Honest and true editors would also bring out some of the bad stuff, but at least there was a little control there to keep it going from completely off the rails, which it is wont to do and is what happened.
Yeah.
It can go completely off the rails, and that's really unfortunate,
One, it's not
for
just the
the
creators
creators.
that did that, because that's well, me and you are fans, but I think we also, the non-fan who pretends to be a fan, I think also started impacting comics a lot more too. And that you had people who were opportunistic. And so as the digital stuff increased, interactions increased, you kind of built a weird anti-comic book market of comic book fans. And again, not
So
to say
weird.
that you shouldn't criticize comics when they're bad, but I do think along with the legit criticisms that do exist and people who give voice to that, like anything in life, there's always going to be the people who take it too far and they don't want to see it win. They just know, hey man, the more I complain about this, the more I get popular. And they're not trying to help comic books. They're not doing it with the goal of, hey, I'd love to see this turn around. It's, hey man, it's great for me if there's something stupid on the page. And I think that's the thing with some of these negative things we have now. And again, completely isolating apart the fact that there are absolutely humongous legitimate concerns. I think there's people now where if you put comics that they now herald as the golden age, if those released now, I think if you released it now, they would complain about them the same way they do now. Right? I
Right.
think if you took some of these runs from the 90s that we know, oh, that went back when comics were fun, if you released them for this age of folks now, I think they would similarly tear those apart as much as they try to hold it because it's again, it's like going into a movie you want to hate. When you
Yeah.
want to dislike a movie, it's really easy to dislike a movie. And I think that's a huge thing that impacted this era of comic books. I think lastly, for this age, Mike, do you think this is an age of comic books where the corporatization of things, these becoming brands and being controlled and no longer being that? Do you think this is a spiral where comics are just going to get worse? Do you think there's a chance that they could turn it around? Like, where do you think? Obviously, we're talking about where this is in the future, but like, where do you think all this will head at any point? Do you think it will eventually just be comics or a digital only thing? Like, where do you project it going?
I think there's a bit of a backlash with the digital thing, at least for the moment. And I know folks that went all digital, 10 years ago, and enjoyed the medium that way, even getting special, Kindle pads or whatever that were
Mm-hmm. To read comics.
the
Yeah.
exact size of the comic book page, and they could turn through it. It was kind of neat. I indulged in some of the digital platforms for a while and liked it, but ultimately the fans really wanted their paper. Um, I do think it'll hold out for a little bit longer. In the long term, you can't deny the great storytelling, and you can't deny that human nature loves a good story.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's got pictures with it, well, that's a home run. Um,
Yeah.
so the medium's here to stay. I'm sure eventually it'll go all digital, but the medium I think is strong, and where it's strong is with the indies. They will move this forward with their creative teams, however. But as far as the big two, I think some of them are starting to realize how the corporate stuff has gotten in the way of good creativity. And I do see some light at the end of the tunnel with them making creative decisions like, Absolute and some of these other things. And and also, the compact editions from DC.
DC.
So I do think that they are going to figure this out and get back on track. But it's been a rough era for the big two. Like I said, really great for the indies.
Yeah.
But it's been kind of a rough era. There have been some home runs to be sure, but I do think that they are pivoting. I don't know. What do you think?
Do I think they'll fix it? I don't know. I would say if I had to bet money on it, I'd say they probably won't. Um, I'm eternally hopeful they will, but I kind of
Right.
am getting a feeling of comic books like I do from the Chicago Bears when I watch them. And no matter how much I hope it's going to be there, they're going to be the Roadrunner chase or the Coyote chasing the Roadrunner, and that Acme Dynamite kit's going to blow up at some point. And I think that's what's so weird with Marvel and DC. Like you said, we can see sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel where they will put something together and you're like, they seem to be getting it. And then inevitably they will announce something like right after that where you're like, what are you doing? Why? Like I will always be, and I know this is a very specific example, but I remember last year Deadpool and Wolverine came out, and my teenage son saw that movie. And he's like, Dad, I really want to go buy Deadpool comic books now. I love that movie. And literally that weekend that Deadpool and Wolverine came out, Marvel announced they were killing Wade Wilson off in the comic books. And I was just like, what are you guys doing? And that's the part of this era that is so perplexing is I feel like I think there's an internal struggle at Marvel and DC of 50% of the people want to move it in the right way, and 50% of the people don't care and think that right way is wrong. And I think what happened more than anything of why I don't know that we'll get out of this, Marvel being bought by Disney, everybody focused on the movie side of things and the theme park side. And look, that's where the money is.
Yeah.
But like you said, the source point of all that money was the comic books, and that was the forgotten piece of it. And
Yeah.
I think where it's going to be hard for things to turn around, I think Warner Brothers owning DC, that's been a bit longer than Disney, but I think you've seen that same thing. Corporations are going to be corporations, and there's always going to be some guy at the top who's like, you know what, we need a new this, and we're just pushing it, and who cares? And they don't think about the trickle down effect of that. And I think for comic books, that's where it's been brutal is you can just tell at some point someone at Marvel got the idea that like Spider-Man's not a character anymore, he's a brand. Batman's not a character, he's a brand. And that is ultimately where I wonder if we'll ever actually get out of this is I don't think that part is going to stop. And so I hope we get to a place that it does, but if I had to bet money on it, I can't say that I think it will. I think the other part that will cause this to not heal. There is now too big of a market of people who make money critiquing comic books, and they don't want it to get fixed. And look, you and I do negative videos. You and I talk about bad comic books when they happen, but there's an industry of that now, and a very strong industry of that, whether we like it or not. There just is. And I'm not saying those folks have always had bad points or that they don't have some valid things. I think it's one of those things where 25, 30% of the time they're spot on. But that's become the point now where, I mean, Mike, the weirdest thing I've seen on this is you'll see comic book sales numbers of a book that sold 50,000 copies. And then there's a video trashing the comic book that's like 1.2 million views. And it's like, I don't know how the industry recovers from that when you have 10x the audience watching a critique of how awful it is compared to the people who actually read the book. And I don't know how your industry recovers from that because, and again, they've earned some of this because, like you mentioned, when they brought all these things to this huge level of corporate things and movies and all that, they invited people in to the comic book industry who openly tell you, I despise comics, who openly tell you, I don't like these characters. And for some reason, Marvel and DC were like, would you like to write a comic book? And I'll never understand that. But they did that. And again, that's where some of the scorn and anger is absolutely justified. But I don't know how you recover when you have that happen. Because now when you have, I would say, more people watching videos bashing comics than are reading them, I don't know where you go for that. I mean, it's the craziest thing. And like, again, I'll always bring this to sports. Sports ratings are so good. And yes, there's a ton of YouTube channels and other markets that cover sports, but there's never more people watching a post-game show online than watched the Super Bowl. There's
Right.
never more people like, oh, watching the reaction of some guy trashing the Bears or the Packers or the Raiders or whoever than actually watched the game. And we have this inverse now of like, this would be the equivalent of 5 million people watch the Super Bowl and then 125 million people watch the post-game coverage of the Super Bowl talking about how much the Super Bowl sucked. It's just that's where I don't know that comics can recover is I don't know how you defeat that. And again, I maybe you can argue you shouldn't, but it's a difficult place that it's in. And anything else to kind of close it out, Mike? Any other thoughts on where comics will be remembered for this era?
Whew, that's rough. That's
It
really rough.
No, but I think if
Yeah.
you're asking me, what do I think the medium will limp on, and I do think it will last. I will say, like, just to kind of, Mike, if they went all digital, would you still buy? And then I'll be honest, if you told me tomorrow we're shutting the stores down, no more paper comics, I probably would find out wherever I could buy the next issue of Conan, but I don't know
Yeah.
that I'd follow any of the other ones. Because for me, the hobby is long boxes. It's
Yeah.
putting the other issue in. Would that kill your like? What would that do to your collection habit if tomorrow DC, Marvel, all of them announced we're done? What would that do to your comic buying?
Well, of course, I wouldn't be able to buy anymore, but I'd still be tracking down old issues of runs that I missed. And I would definitely be trying to keep up with
Would you
Conan.
purchase digitally though? If they went all digitally, would you still purchase your series digitally, or would that be the exit ramp for you?
There would be a few comics that I would read digitally. Yeah, if that was the only option. Yeah, I would.
Yeah, I mean, Conan, I would kill. But man, it would take so much away if they did. Like if Savage
Yeah.
Sword was just on a pad instead of that, the great black and white. But I don't know. Let us know. What do you guys think? What do you think this last 20 years of comics will be defined as? I know there'll be some folks who are really negative on that. That's okay. Again, if you agree with us, disagree with us, just put your thoughts down below, folks. We love hearing what you say. We will never pretend we're the experts. We're just two guys giving our opinions on here. We appreciate seeing your guys' thoughts down below. Agree or disagree. Have a great weekend, folks. God bless you. We'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.